No, brother, you're a little sideways there. I don't think that it matters, but you kind of turn to the side there.
How about now?
Oh yeah, there you go. Welcome to Conversations with Chevalier, brother. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm trying to figure this out. Look, I got all kind. I got all kind of wires and everything going on, but I just, man, I just frustrated. This is
Yeah, I know.
not my cup of tea, man. Thank God
Well,
I still, thank God I could still light a cigar though.
yeah. So, what are you smoking tonight? Are you smoking?
You damn right I am. I'm gonna,
What you got?
I'm gonna light up an Angel Share.
All right, all right. So, is that your favorite cigar?
No, I really don't have a favorite cigar, but tonight, I'm wearing my pink. I don't know if you can see it with the lighting.
I
Wearing
do.
and thinking about all the ladies out there. Even though I think about them every day of my life, it doesn't have to be October, but especially my daughter Liana for all she does for awareness and just her big heart. So just doing it for them.
That's right. Oh, I know
But,
you're aware
but
that this is
honestly, we don't do it for them. We do it because we love them. We do it for ourselves.
right, 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 right. And you know what? We love people, so that's what it's all about. That's what the cigar culture is all about. So I got a couple questions for you, brother. So I already
Absolutely. Please, please, Yoel, please give me a moment. See if I can figure this phone out.
do
Right
it.
now, I'm looking at you. I see you blurry. I'm trying to figure this out. And I'm sorry, man. I tried on the computer. I tried on the iPad, and I have nobody to help me. So
Take your time.
give me
Take your
one moment,
time.
please. Okay.
Take
All
your
right.
time.
Okay.
So you guys see, we got the great Carlito Fuente Jr. in Conversations with Chevalier. This is a big honor for me to just have him. I think we're gonna be dizzy by the time he figures this thing out, though, guys.
How about now? Am I sideways? Am I sideways now? Yeah.
Yes, sir. You are very sideways right now. There you go.
Okay. I'm seeing two screens. Do you hear me well?
I hear you great. You're crystal
Okay.
clear.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'll get by like that because I'm
All
seeing
right.
screen on my phone, but we'll get by.
Yeah, I just said somebody said you're good, but I'm fuzzy, so I don't know what that's about. But
Yeah, I see you fuzzy. That's why. But maybe let me put my mighty Manfred hat on, and then I'll get in. Hey, here we go. Yeah. Oh man, now you're not fuzzy anymore. Now I can see.
ah, there it is. Now that's what everybody recognizes when they look at all the pictures of you out there on social media. They recognize the hat, the cigar. So, hey, what's your favorite drink when you're smoking a cigar?
You know really, it depends where I'm at. I I normally I drink a dry martini, not shaken, stirred, but I don't like it with it very watery. I like it very dry with olive. Occasionally, I'll splurge and do with a blue cheese stuff or something. But I could drink wine, and lately I've been really enjoying some dry Manhattans.
Oh yeah, I
Yeah,
love those.
listen, I like a lot of things, and it depends just the mood I'm in, I guess.
Yeah, I know how that is. What about now? You and I have talked about music before. We've had a few conversations, but I'm going to ask the question because most people don't know what you like. I got a pretty good idea what you like, so I'm going to ask you, what's your favorite music or favorite artist
My favorite art
or
is
your favorite artist?
my favorite artist.
Yes.
Well, the first thing that came to my mind was James Brown.
Really?
Yeah, man. I grew up. I grew up watching him and following him. I love the moves and everything. And I remember I used to practice sliding across my mother's living room. That true story. You know. And later on, I just I love the Temptations. Always big Temptation. My Girl's one of my favorite songs. But I am. I just can't stop hearing. Whether it's Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Tom Jones, and of course the King Elvis. I love that. And now I'm getting a little bit more sophisticated with time because I just see what sophisticated people do. So I'm a little more into the Arturo Sandoval, the more sophisticated, a little bit,
Yeah.
and something more improvised. And I'm really into that also.
So I was trying to anticipate your answer. I was sitting here and I said he's either going to say Elvis or Arturo Sandoval because we talked about Arturo and once in one of our conversations before, and I knew you really liked him, but I knew you loved Elvis.
Yeah,
But
I
when
do.
you
You know, grew up watching Elvis with my mom. I remember my father used to always argue with my mom. I hate that guy. I don't know what people.
I think we lost your sound.
In. But
Okay.
I remember my dad always going to a drive-in theater with them, and you know, my mom's such a big Elvis fan, and my father said, "I don't know what you see in him. He is a terrible actor. He doesn't even sing that well. This and that, blah blah blah, back and forth." And one day, later on, my father went to Vegas to see him at the Hilton live, and with my mom, and I was in Tampa. You know, you always thought to myself, "I'll see him next time. I'll see him next time." But I was in a band myself, so really the weekends are pretty occupied for me. And then next time never came around. But I'll never forget when my dad returned home to Tampa. He told me, "Oh my God, Carlito, oh my God, son, that is the greatest actor, performer, singer I've ever seen in my life. He's bigger than human." And I said, "Dad, you know, you really change your mind pretty quick."
Oh yeah, he did a 180. I mean, he hated him at first, huh?
He did. I guess he did. You know, my mom always talked about Elvis and how beautiful Elvis was and everything. And I'm gonna share a story with you. I'm growing up. I loved baseball like a lot of children did, or a lot of kids when I was 7, 8 years old. And I remember I used to play a lot of baseball in our small little yard. We broke a couple of neighbors' windows and lost a couple of balls because we didn't want to claim it came from our yard. So
Right, right.
we could get a butt whipping back then. You know, it was politically correct. You know, either you got whipped or you ran like hell, and you ran from your mother's slipper, because even if you turned that corner, it would boomerang. I don't know how she did it, but that slipper, she had it just was like a boomerang. But anyway, one of my heroes growing up was Juan Marichal. He was a right-hander back in the 60s, 70s with the San Francisco Giants. Great pitcher. And he was famous for his high leg kick. He used to pick up his left leg almost to the back of his head, and he threw that ball, and he was fierce, man. You know, when he lost the game, he lost it 1-0, 2-1, 13 innings. You know, he finished every game.
Hmm.
And he lost to people like, he pitched against the greatest, Sandy Koufax, Don Drysdale, Bob.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. Those were his competing teams back then. Amazing. So I used to imitate him and everything. And with time, believe it or not, we became dear friends. And I even went with him to one of the Hall of Fame inaugurations up in Cooperstown. Went to one of the Boston Red Sox game when Ted Williams was there and Pedro Martinez was,
Wow.
I think, the first, 7 out of 9 batters or something. We became good friends because I got involved because I was doing a lot of charity work with him. He had
Okay.
in the Dominican Republic. It had, since COVID, it hasn't taken place, but the Juan Marichal Golf Celebrity Event, and it's to raise money for all the whatever the cause that's supporting local communities and so forth. A lot of hurricane relief and things like that we go through in the I got to know a lot of these old Hall of Famers and so forth. And one day we're out somewhere with his wife and my wife, and we're just all talking, and an Elvis song comes on. And he says, "Carlito, I met Elvis once." And I said, "Juan, or Mr. Marichal, when was that?" He said, "No, I was in Vegas. He liked to play cards. He's a big
Hmm.
card player. And, of course, for entertainment. He doesn't make a living from that, but I just want to make that clear in case one of his
Right.
fans are listening." And he says, "I'm sitting there, and some security people come up to me," because, of course, he has security also. I mean, this guy's a Hall of Famer,
Right.
and,
Right.
he was one of the greatest right-handers of all time. And he says, Elvis is here in the house, and he would like to meet you." And he said, "Oh, my God, my wife would like to meet him. I would be honored." This and so. So he gets up at the table. They take him to this little back room where he was, and he walks out of some hallway and
Hmm.
this secured area. And Juan Marichal told me, he says, "Carlito," these are the words I don't forget because I look up to him as a hero. He said, "Let me tell you something. I'm a man's man, you know, and I, But let me tell you
Yeah.
something. I never seen a more impressive, most beautiful man in my life. He was overpowering with graciousness and beauty. So, I mean, those kind of
Wow.
stories. Yeah, that's
Oh
that's
man.
that's what he told me. Coming from him, I wish I would have met Elvis at some point.
Well, I know you like them. I got one more question for you. So, what's your favorite food or restaurant?
Wow. Uh, my favorite food, if I don't eat it every day, because everything, variety is important, is
Right.
probably sushi and sashimi. I love it in a good restaurant when it's fresh. I love sushi and sashimi once a week, but I love it. I have to say my favorite food, I don't eat it every day, but still is black beans and rice and,
Wow.
and in the roast pork and just the real Cuban Christmas Eve dinner. And it's just something about that flavor and that taste. It just brings me back to my happiest and earliest memories. And no matter how old I get in life and how much I live, that's still, that's what I was weaned on. That's my roots.
Right.
And
Right.
I think that's one of my all-time favorite foods. Favorite restaurant? I can't say I have one, but I have to say Il Pasticcio in Santiago's Italian restaurant. If you want to eat a porterhouse steak or a ribeye or something, you're gonna get a plate broken over your head, and the chef is gonna yell at you, saying, "Get the hell out of here and go to a
Oh,
steak."
you're not getting any steak there,
The Italian restaurant, and he speaks with a real
huh?
he starts scratching his head. He is crazy as shit. And he said, "Oh, here we eat pasta, we eat pasta, we eat pasta." And I just, I just love the ambience. I love to go there. The food is excellent. It's real pasta. It's like real home cooking. Where it's nothing. When you don't want to eat something from the sea that tastes like it's something from the mountains or something from the woods that take like it tastes like they just buried it out of the ocean. You
Right.
want it to be real, and this is real home cooking Italian food, which is amazing. The ambiance, the music, I just feel home there.
Well, I tell you what, I heard you say that you like the black beans and rice, and it takes you back to your childhood. So let's talk about that a little bit. You grew up in a family where the cigar industry was like, you started, your family basically started it, I believe. And so I read back that your grandfather started Arturo Fuente. How was that created? What got him to doing that? What made him decide he wanted to start Arturo Fuente?
Well, it goes back before my grandfather. Actually, since he was born, he was one of nine siblings, and he was born in a rural area. Uh, I guess today you would call it they were peasants. They they lived off the land. They were farmers, and they lived off the crop they grew each year. When they weren't growing tobacco, they grew potatoes or vegetables, and it was a very small community outside Havana, the rural area. And my grandfather, since he could remember, he would get up in the morning. They would pray to the tobacco gods. Back then, there was no electricity. So they would pray to the tobacco gods to, stop the rain or give them a little bit of water because everything depended so much on nature. And he used to tell me, I used to ask him, Abuelo, grandfather, what do you mean you prayed to the tobacco gods? What were those gods like? He said they were the Native Americans. They were the they were
Wow.
they were the Indios. When the Europeans came to America looking for whether it was spices, whether it was riches, whatever it was, they discovered tobacco. And tobacco was used for social reasons, as we use today. It was also used for medical reasons. But he said, most importantly to our culture, it was used for spiritual reasons. And I've learned through those teachings that even today, a lot of the old American natives, it doesn't matter where, North America, Central America, or South America, they still use tobacco when one of their family passes on their ancestors to light tobacco, and this is their way of belief that tobacco goes up to the skies, embraces them, and this is the way to communicate and pay their respect.
Wow.
So, I grew up with all these things with my grandfather, and when he was the age of 15 years old, maybe 14. I know he arrived when he was 15, but I don't know how long those ferries used to take. Uh, his older brothers and sisters had migrated to Key West to
Okay.
study and help the family in Cuba, which they had just gone through the War of Independence, the Spanish-American War in Cuba. And there was a lot of hardship, a lot of families going through trouble. And there was a big boom or a big industry in Key West for the cigar industry. Key West, 90 miles away from Havana, and the ferries would go back and forth with the cigar makers and the tobacco. So my grandfather's older brothers and sisters, I don't know, there were 4 or 5 at that time who were in Key West. He came in search of them, and he landed in Key West. And since he was a cigar maker naturally, that's what he did growing up, with tobacco and cigars, for the local market, not for a brand that will be known internationally or export anything. This was just something that they a lot of times they bartered, they traded cigars or tobacco
Wow.
for food and so forth. That's the way it was back then after the war. And when he arrived in the United States, he started working at the Gato factory. The Gato, there's actually an area of Key West when he landed in Key West called Gatoville, and there's actually a park there which is a tribute to the migrants and cigar makers that arrived in Key West, the original one. And there's a big cigar with my grandfather's name, which is a tribute to my grandfather.
Wow.
Actually, the home that he rented, brothers and sisters, a small little home on 706 Elizabeth Street. Now, if you get 7 and 6, it adds to 13. Like everything else in our entire life, adds up to
Wow.
13. But my grandfather lived there for a while, made money. Well, very little, whatever they made. Maybe saved a couple of dollars a month. And 2 might have been a lot. But save money, brothers, sisters, send money back home to help the struggling families and neighbors and so forth. And that's when the big boom came, which there was a difficulty in getting the cigars from Key West into the big markets of the Northeast and the Midwest. New York, Washington, Boston,
Right.
Chicago. Those were the big markets. That was the commerce. But there was a big struggle because of ferries and everything to get the boats up there. Key West was surrounded by reefs. And if you ever visit Key West, you will see, even though the cigar history, the Cuban heritage, the Bohemian heritage of Key West,
Right.
that fusion, you will see that everything in Key West is really based upon piracy, pirates, the old pirates, the Jack Sparrow.
Right.
And that's because the number one industry was not the cigar industry. Number one industry was shipwrecking. And those boats that used to come from Spain or whatever, Mexico, South America, with riches that would stop in Cuba to pick up bales of tobacco and some, people that want to make cigars, they'll bring them to Key West. Occasionally, they were shipwrecks. So that was the biggest industry. All the people in Key West, or not all the people who made a living from shipwrecks, they would go and they would recover all the wealth they could. So what happened was Tampa was being founded and developed. There was a competition for the railroad because actually with the ferries and everything, it was too expensive, took too long to get the product, cigars back then, to the market.
Okay.
The railroad was completed first in Tampa by Plant. I think Robert something Plant finished the railroad because they took Flagler. You probably heard Flagler in Miami, the name and so forth.
Right.
It took him much longer to finish the railroad because he had to build a 7-mile bridge before he got to Key West. So because there was this transformation formed, they would take very inexpensively and quickly all the products from Tampa Bay all the way to the Northeast and so forth. And Tampa Bay was just a natural port with no big reefs where the ferries back then could come with all the products, tobacco and so forth, come in safely right in the harbor of Tampa Bay. It was a natural. And overnight, Key West kind of diminished to nothing, and Tampa became the fine cigar capital of the world. So
Wow.
my grandfather, that's the only thing he really knew. And that was his life, his brothers, his sisters, his parents, his uncle, because I have an uncle, Julio Fuente, who also had factories, and on my grandmother's side also. But that was the way of life back then. So he was young, and at the age of 20, he came to Tampa, and you want to know what Tampa, and then he started a company, Julio Fuente, in his own name, with a partner named Victor Diaz, who
Okay.
Victor is John Oliva's great grandfather.
Wow.
Johnito Oliva.
Wow.
grandfather was my grandfather's partner. That's why, we're all, it goes back for so many years. Started
Okay.
Fuente in 1912.
Wow.
And
So
that's,
what were some of the challenges that they faced when they started in Tampa? Because Tampa was new, basically a new city, and a new industry kind of coming into the city. So what were some of the challenges that your grandfather faced, early in Fuente's history?
well, I would think as far as I wasn't around and not even my parents, but I think it would be trying to keep the chinch bugs and all those things out of the chairs. If you don't know what chinch bugs are,
I
those
have
are
no
the
idea.
fight like hell, keep
I
it
have
out.
no idea what a chinch
Well,
bug is. Is that like chiggers?
as
Like
a
those
matter
chiggers
of
that burrow in your
fact,
skin?
in Spanish, anybody that's in the industry will know this term. The little factories, they call them chinchales. Chinchales. In English, they call them buckeyes. I don't know why. Small little cigar factories, 3 rollers to 15, 20 rollers. And the big companies always, ridicule them. They're nothing but a chinchada, buckeye. And one day I asked some old timer that was still living, what's chinchad? They said because back then all the chairs were full of chinch bugs. And, cigar makers would be hopping on their chair and everything. And it wasn't because they were active working, they were getting their ass chewed up by these. The challenges back then, I guess it would have been penetrating an unknown market and so forth. But Tampa grew overnight from 1885 on. I mean, it just 18. There's a lot of factories that we came in. Actually, our license, our tobacco permit number was factory number 80. So
Wow.
of the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of factories that have been throughout the history of Tampa, and I think there's 600 and so I don't know how many actually, how far up. I know that we were factory number 80, but we were not the first. And
Wow.
I just, I think like anything else with a new product back then and so forth I think they probably had the same challenges as us, but they didn't have the communication that we have and
Right.
really, getting into the markets, getting to know everyone. I mean, it's taken a lifetime, 3 lifetime, I guess, and part of another one, just to get to where we're at, and we have so much more to go. Really.
I, I tell you what, I read though, I was doing some research on Fuente and I read that like in the early 20s, the first factory that you guys had actually burned down.
burned down
It
to the
burned.
burned down to the ground. My grandfather was the tobacco man in the factory. Mr. Diaz was the administrator. I think he was like the CPA or accountant by profession. And my grandfather spent 3 or 4 months in Cuba at a time during the tobacco season. I mean, that was his passion: tobacco, buying the tobacco, blending. He was a cigar maker, and it took a while, I guess, back then to get to Cuba, getting back. It's not like just getting on a plane and you're there.
Right.
45 minutes probably from Miami, if not less. Uh, you know, and he was there in one of his trips, and he got a letter that the factory had burned down. My grandfather, I know it's written, but he lost everything. But
Wow.
he was a very proud man, and he had acquired the factory was doing very, very well. All the history things that I read and everything, the families, all the oral lessons. They were up to about 500 cigar makers, and they were doing very, very good and expanding. And he literally lost everything. I mean, he lost everything because he had.
Wow.
And my grandfather was a very proud man, and he refused to go to the banks and claim bankruptcy. He was a man of his word, a man of honor, and he told the banks and all his creditors that he would give them their word, that slowly, but he will pay them back steadily. And he did just that. My grandfather heard that Chicago was a growing city, and there was a need for cigar makers and cigars. He went to Chicago for a while, and he had like a little chinchada, little cigar store where he made cigars and everything. And I think just one windy winter too much. He said, "I can't take this," And he came back to Tampa, Florida, and right away he was hired by other big factories, and he was like he ran the company. He was like the tobacco man, general manager. And one of the companies was Arango, Jose Arango and Arango. And Arango, actually, you might know the name because of Arango cigars in Chicago, very well known
Right.
national distributor. And it's really the same family. It's a family that
Wow.
went from Tampa, started distribution in Chicago and so forth. So it's amazing. Even now, speaking to you, I all these things click in my mind. I go, wow, I don't think about these things unless somebody, is as curious as you asking questions because. But it's just amazing when you ask questions of why. The answer is I don't know how it could have been any other way. It's
Right.
it's just who we are. It's been our life, And I look at all the families and names, how and somehow, if we're from this world, we were connected in one way or another, generations ago.
Right, right. I read that it said it took your dad almost 24 years to bounce back from that fire and kind of rebuild the business and get production, or your grandfather,
That's true.
24 years to bounce back and get the business going again, to where he was starting to really produce a lot of cigars. And they said he made some amazing sacrifices to make it happen, but he persevered.
Yeah, he definitely did. That was always his dream. I mean, he lived, he slept, everything was cigars and tobacco. And that was his life, as well as the woman he married, my grandmother. My grandmother, Christina, her father, Oscar Trujillo, had his own factory. And my grandmother, when she was in her teens, was a cigar maker in her father's factory. They taught them all to make cigars. Everybody helped. And then she met my grandfather. He was 25 years older than my grandmother. And, you know, they were making cigars together. So, I mean, and then my grandmother's sisters and brothers, they all were with my grandfather. And on my mother's side, I remember growing up, when I was it just says my earliest memory growing up through the factories, and that they were my aunts, uncles on both sides. Everybody. My grandfather had the factory, so all the family worked with family. It was a very, very, I think, unusual situation to find today. Back then, it could have been very much more common, because I think that's how families who were humble, that didn't have any luxuries but had all the love in the world. That's how
Right.
they survived, and that's how they prospered, by always sticking together. It just seemed like they were inseparable, as far as I'm concerned. And I can remember growing up.
I think because also, back at that time, they didn't have social media, televisions, and all of these things. So people had to tough it out together. They had to find their intestinal fortitude. That's what we call it in the Marine Corps. You had to find your intestinal fortitude and
Absolutely.
come together and be creative together in order to keep the company going. And I think that's just an amazing thing. But let's fast forward a little bit. So
You
your dad, oh, go
okay.
ahead, go ahead.
Wait. I know you're the one that's asking the questions, but I'm just thinking back, and I don't want to lose this because I might remember for another day. But what's the difference? They didn't have social media, and they didn't have these news channels that were on 24 hours a day and everything. So
Right.
how did they know how did they communicate? The front door was never locked. It was a little frame, little wooden door with a little screen on there so flies and mosquitoes can get through, with a little latch. That's all. It was never locked. It would swing open on a spring. So neighbors were going in and out. So even though they worked all day together, at night they congregated. They sat on
Right.
chairs. They smoked cigars. They took out their whiskey, whatever it was. And the neighbors, family, everybody sat around the table smoking cigars around the living room or in the porch, and they would be speaking about everything that took place that day and what's happening around the world. That was their source of information, and that was their way of life.
Wow. You know what? I sometimes does it make you feel like, I know it does me, as I watch my kids grow, because I got one just graduated college. I got, another one that just started college. I got a couple in high school and one small one. And I sit here, there's such a wide range, and they get on social media and they're doing their thing, and it's almost a lot of work to keep them together, because everybody's doing their own thing. And even mom and dad, we come home, we get on our phones. I'm on Instagram and I'm doing shows with you, and I'm doing all these different things. I think sometimes, that's the difference. Today's society, it's a lot more work to keep the family together, and I think it's just a lot more work. It seemed like it might have been a little better back then.
It is. No, it definitely is. And even though you're lean and mean, and a fighting machine, to keep up with that breed at age, I don't care how. That's a job, man. Because you have one that's out of college, you got a small one, someone in the middle. Of course, they're all going to be going different directions, man.
Right, man. I got one that's playing volleyball tonight. I got another one that's out playing basketball. They're all over the place, man. They're everywhere.
You have such a huge following. You're so dedicated to all your fans and all the people. You dedicate. This is where you're at. Maybe a lot more than you should be, and you're just fortunate to be married to Wonder Woman.
Well, I told you Friday night when we talked Friday night. What did I say? I said, man, you know what? I'm on the when we talked. I told you I am on the patio with my wife, and I ain't going nowhere. I didn't even do anything but sit out here and have drinks with her and turn on a little smooth jazz and just kind of relax, But even with family, your dad took over Arturo Fuente in what, 1958 was it?
It was 1958, 57, 58.
Yeah. Wow. So I wonder, what was that like? What do you know what challenges he faced and what he was looking at as he wanted to grow the company? Like how did that work for him?
Well, I was very young, 3 years old, and going on 4. And I do remember because my sister was just born. And my father, his challenges were endless, and they were ruthless. He had no money. The company was struggling. My grandfather was very satisfied selling every cigar he made to the neighborhood market and things like that. He would refuse to sell any cigars on credit. He kept his whole bank account in a wad of money rolled with a rubber band in his pocket. That was his accounts receivable, accounts. You cannot grow a business, at that time like that anymore. But my grandfather was happy. All he wanted is for him to have food in the home, enough for him and all the neighbors and anybody who walked through that front door at night, play his card games, his poker, and keep the radio, find out what's happening in Cuba and, all the numbers and all this stuff, it was a part of a community that was very unique. But he had no really big interest in building the company, interstate, anything like that. And that's what my father, one of the things that he did, aside from working around the clock, I mean, he did everything, every single stage and every segment of making a cigar, from preparing it to the whole factory. My father did everything himself. He was a one-man team for a long time. And of course, he had my grandfather's peers who were still cigar makers, but he was the one that really was running the show, because even though my father was not officially working with my grandfather, my father was always there after he worked, because my grandfather Arturo could not afford to pay him when he was married to give him enough to support his young bride. That my mother's parents, or my father's in-laws, were bakers in Tampa, the old Wonder Bread, Wholesome Bread.
Wow.
They were supervisors, and in Tampa at that time, being a baker was like, being a doctor compared to a cigar maker.
Really?
Yeah, yes, it was. It was like, hey, you bring food to the table, If you don't have food on the table, let these old guys go smoke in the room back then, but they was about the food. And, so my father worked as a baker for around 3 years while I was born and everything, to save money, at least so he could hope to start building his own home, because we lived with my grandparents. And, and he was the one that started, after he always worked in the factory because he felt bad. Remember, my grandfather was married. My grandmother was 25. He was already, when my father was born, he was already, 48 or something. So, my father, when he was a teenager, always worked with my grandfather. He felt bad seeing his grandfather at his father, his age, working like that so hard. So he grew up in the business. So when he would finish the bakery after long hours, then he would always go help out in the factory. So, when it came to time to, actually what happened, the true story, is that at that time, tobacco was controlled by alcohol, tobacco, and firearm. ATF, alcohol, tobacco,
ATF.
Firearm. It should be that way today. I don't know what the hell the FDA and politicians and all this shit get involved. It should be alcohol, tobacco, firearms. But there was back then, cigars were made in bond. In bond, it was like a free zone. The tobacco came from Cuba, and there were no duties paid on that tobacco. It was kept in a factory or in a warehouse, and not until the tobacco was removed from the warehouse inside the city of Tampa. There were customs officials and everything always in those warehouses, or the factory was big enough. Many factories had their own warehouse part of the factory. Was an official customs agent that would be there, the only one to collect tobacco in and out of that section. Tobacco taxes were not paid until the tobacco was removed. This gave Tampa a huge advantage over Cuba, which had a high tariff on all finished cigars. So that's why Tampa grew so much, and in some years made as much as 500 million cigars made with Cuban.
Wow.
Tampa. And you can find that. You look it up on Google. You can see it. There's many books written, Tampa in the heyday. And if you think of 500 million cigars, it's more than Cuba, Dominican Republic, Nicaragua, Honduras, Jamaica, Mexico, all put together.
Wow.
You ship into the United States, or ship, I think, worldwide. And
that is something.
A lot of factories. Imagine the potential that Cuba has to produce tobacco and everything if it were under different social and economic conditions. Because we're talking about back in the 30s and 40s, up to the war. It was something, and then during the war, the stories I heard that most of the men went off to war, and all the cigar makers would then, everything was taken over by the women in the factories. All the cigars made for those serving and fighting for our country were made by women. That's why,
right,
to me, it's so important that women are recognized in our industry. And I know I'm jumping around, but these are the reasons why. Because when I see all those photos and I hear these stories about the women out there had to run the companies and do everything because all the men went off to the war and everything. But that was in the glory days of Tampa. And not now it's glorious another way, with the exception of last night that we lost to the Kansas City Chiefs. That my home guy is unbelievable. So, and the GOAT Brady, man, he's still the best. With the exception of, that we didn't win last night, the Bucks, go Bucks. Tampa's an amazing city, man.
It is. I get to visit. I think I told you my brother lives there.
Yeah.
And so I visited a couple of times, but I've never done anything cigar-wise. So, yeah, I told you some weeks ago, when I come, we're going to smoke at the Grand Cathedral. I got to get over there and take my picture with Angela and smoke at the Grand Cathedral.
Yeah, for sure we'll do that. But also you come to our headquarters where I grew up, the Fuente factory, which is now Fuente headquarters. We don't make cigars there any longer, but that's where we have all our offices, everything, the foundation, and everything we do in that office. Across the street, we built another building, brick building, again, a replica of what our original. That's where we have our bonded warehouse, and we ship everything out of there. So there's a lot of cigar activity, and of course,
wow.
Our partners, the Newman factory. I mean, that's a running factory. It's the last one. In Tampa, and they're one of the last in the United States, and they're making handmade cigars there, the American, with products 100% grown and made in the United States. And they're also making some machine-made cigars that they've made there for generations. And they have a tour, a museum, and there's yes, you got cigar history in Tampa, you got mafia history, you have all the history of the bootlegging, the tunnel, the ground, and everything. They used to get, to bring in all the bootlegging, the prohibition, and tobacco, and
Wow.
I'm with a background like that, man. I'm lucky I survived.
I know that's right. It's interesting. So, like, your dad took over. He did his thing. So, did you guys ever leave Tampa? Like, did you? Because how did you end up in the Dominican Republic? So.
Well,
what journey took you to leave Tampa for a while?
That's a very good question. Did we ever leave Tampa? Completely no. Still today, we have not left Tampa. We don't make cigars in Tampa any longer. With the exception of we have some brands that the Newmans make for us for the Cuban market in Miami. I don't know if it's still Cuban or, whatever that market was back in the 60s and 70s, 80s. That was a huge market. My cousin and family came from Cuba, started distribution there, and family helps family. So it became land distributors 2226 Southwest 8th Street. And I remember my father, you know, we go back and everybody knows the glorious name Padron and the Padron family. But back then, we were two fierce as competitors because we made the most volume of popular price cigars. We were the biggest. And Padron made the most expensive cigars in Miami for the Cuban market. And my father and Jose Padron, Orlando Padron, as we know him, you know, they were always good friends and always had a respect. They always knew each other, respect for each other, but they were competitors. And we were always in Tampa. And like exception for that, I mean, all our handmade cigars were taken offshore in 1984. But before that, our passion has always been a handmade cigar. My grandfather never, I mean, he was old school, hard-headed, I guess you could say, stubborn, you know. It's my way, you know, this is the only way, you know. And he was a real Cubano, you know, a real farmer and a real, we call Guajiro, which is a Cuban farmer, you're hard-working.
Right.
Around the clock. And, you know, he'd never wanted anything to do with any kind of innovation or machinery or anything like that. He's a cigar maker's art, you know, it's by hand and everything. But the reality was that cigar makers were retiring, they were becoming ill, they were up in age, they were passing on, and none of the next generation was learning. They had no interest to sit down at a table a year and go practicing and so forth to make a cigar.
Wow.
And think about Tampa was developing, people want to go into interstate, you know, real estate development, or they became contractors or became entrepreneurs, teachers, doctors. It was a progression of sitting at a table, you know, day in and day out, your entire life to make a cigar by hand. It's no difference than the handmade hats or
right,
or the lace in Belgium that, you know, that the government subsidized, so that art is not lost because people do not want to learn the trade. They just can't, you know, customers will not pay what it would cost to really do that by hand. That it became what, you know, I hate to say the word, but it became like a dying trade or dying art. And everything became mostly machine made in Tampa, with the exception of the old timers that were there but were fading quickly.
Wow.
And there was Cuban embargo comes in. There's no more Cuban tobacco. There's all this panicking. Years later, whichever how much time it took, some of the pioneers like Angel Oliva and others brought a lot of families who were leaving Cuba, finding the way, because they were thrown out. The first thing that Cuba did was nationalize their main industries, which was tobacco, sugar, rum. If you were in that business, the government took over. Most families that I've been able to speak to, and I'm aware, they were given 24 hours leave with what you have on, or you were thrown in prison. Everything was just stolen from them. And that's where you have Bacardi that left, and you have, you know, all the big Cuban cigar names that left that went to Dominican Republic, Canary Islands, Jamaica, wherever, Mexico. They went to countries around in the Caribbean nearby. That's when the first Cubans of the industry started migrating so that they could survive and feed their families. Of course, what they knew was tobacco. They were the greatest of the greats. And they ended up in Honduras, Mexico, Nicaragua, Dominican Republic, and they started developing tobacco with the seeds that they brought. Same style as trying to find the land and do the things the way they did back home, in their native land in Cuba.
And so you guys did the same thing, though, didn't you? Didn't Fuente move to Mexico at one point, right around the same time as that tobacco embargo?
But for a different reason. That was later on. But the first families, they came to all the countries in the Caribbean, and by growing tobacco here, they also started recognizing they could teach people how to make cigars here and supply that big demand. There was this big void in the big market in the United States for handmade cigars, and Cuban cigars were no longer legally available. So they started teaching cigar makers and everything. But these countries were already growing tobacco. We were using tobacco from Honduras, Nicaragua, Brazil, Mexico,
wow,
back in the mid and late 60s that I remember, we were already using the tobacco. But then in in the 70s, like mid 70s, 74, 73, as we saw the writing on the wall, and we had conversation, my father and I, we wanted to remain in the cigar business. The people that used to supply us, the family, the Ortiz family, Fortino Ortiz, his son is still living, Jorge Ortiz. If you go to the PCA and IP Cigar of the past, you might have met him. Very distinguished man. We started a partnership with a brand called Rio Bravo, and
Okay.
I helped in designing. I'm talking about, bro, this is like 73 with the bull and everything, Rio Bravo, and we made cigars there with them for a while, and our market was used to Tampa fresh cigars. That was
Right.
that old Cuban traditional market and everything. And those cigar makers, so remember back then cigars weren't aged. If your cigars were aged, it's because they sat on the shelf too long and they didn't sell. Cigars, people,
Okay.
if you even look at advertising, everything fresh, fresh, fresh.
Right. Right.
Even the boxes, look at some of the boxes, fresh, fresh, fresh. First thing people used to do to squeeze the cigars to see if they're moist or something. Maybe because back then there weren't humidors and everything, and people wanted moist cigars.
Right.
They were used to that because if it wasn't moist to them, it meant that they were stale. They had dried out.
Wow.
The cigars that we received from Mexico were as hard as a broomstick and as perfectly made and shiny as a candle. You know,
Wow.
but people would touch them and it didn't give. They were solid because they were long filler and they were made by hand. And that tobacco was thick and it held the structure. But people were complaining the cigars, they would not even try them because they felt they were too hard. And
Wow.
that was a problem for us. And it didn't work out eventually. Nobody's fault. It's just the market wasn't ready for us back then or for that type of cigar. Well, we had our market in Tampa because one of the biggest brands in the late 60s and early 70s that hit the Northeast was called Te Amo. Te Amo
Okay.
was, there were signs of Te Amo in every, 2 or 3 in every street in Manhattan. I mean, that was a big brand, and that was the cigar
Wow.
in Mexico. But that was huge. But from there, Mexico didn't work out. My father searched Jamaica. It didn't really, for some reason, it didn't work out. And that's when we had an invitation to go to Nicaragua. And we started in Nicaragua. But before going to Nicaragua, my father came to visit the Dominican Republic because his cousin, Orlando Garcia, who was his partner, who owned Land Products that had the big market in South Florida that I mentioned about earlier.
Right.
He was also a general manager or a sales manager for Balsal Cigars. That's how we acquired the Balsal name, which is another old Cuban brand. But anyway, my cousin, I don't know where I was going with that, but I got lost there. But we were talking about.
We're talking about how you transitioned from Mexico
Yeah, exactly.
going into right.
Yes. Okay. My cousin had visited the Dominican Republic and had told my father, man, that island is just like Cuba. You should go there. You're gonna love it. It's a beautiful island. The palm trees, the mountains, the food, the music. There's so much similarity to our culture in the Dominican Republic, and you're using Dominican tobacco. We've been using Dominican tobacco. That was always Tampa's favorite tobacco
Right.
for the Cuban embargo. And he says, but there's a factory there. And he brought back a box of cigars. I remember it was La Aurora number 4. I'm talking about this was like 1973, 74. And my father, I remember they were sitting in his bar in our what we call a Florida room, which was in like an entertaining room.
Right.
And I was already working with my father already, so I was already puffing on cigars and everything. I don't remember smoking any of them, but I remember that, that box, everything, the cigars were beautiful. I was very impressed with their band back then. It was very unusual to see that beautiful red band with that real good embossing gold and everything. It wasn't common in Tampa. That had been lost in time.
Okay.
So my father said, now, man, I'm going to go to the Dominican Republic. So he came first to the Dominican Republic because my cousin had told me that the president had passed a law and they're starting an industrial free zone in La Romana, which is on the east coast of the Dominican Republic. And so my father went there and everything, and there were offices there of this industrial free zone. They're starting to lease out space and everything. And my father inquired, but they gave him a runaround for months and months, and he would write them, and he had people contact him. Came back a couple of times, and and he had the bankers call and make sure, and my father was legit and everything. But they never really confessed to him. But at that same moment, we got an invitation in Nicaragua to go to Nicaragua through the Oliva family, which is not the Oliva cigar makers, but Angel Oliva family, John Oliva, the tobacco growers.
Okay.
Because same last name, but two different families.
Right.
They were saying that General Somoza, the President Somoza, was inviting all the Cuban know-how because he wanted to develop Nicaragua as a great producing cigar country. You reckon that, that tobacco cigars are one of the most democratic crafts in industry that give a lot of work and help so much and is so important. And most importantly to him, that he wanted one day for one of the products to arrive anywhere in the world and on the box say, hecho a mano Nicaragua. To him, that was a product that would travel through all borders. And so,
wow.
Nicaragua, that's how we started. We started in Nicaragua in 1974, and we were really growing by leaps and bounds, doing fantastic. In 1978, March 26, 1978, factory burned down to the ground. And it wasn't war yet. It was protests. It was people rioting and so forth. And I don't know why, but everything always starts in the tobacco and cigar regions. The cigar makers are hothead. I don't know what it is. And there were 4 factories only at that time. Now there's literally hundreds and hundreds. There were only 4. And one was General Somoza's factory, Tabacalera Nacional. No, not Nacional. That was in Honduras. It was La Joya, Nicaragua, with General Somoza's factory. It was Carlito Cigars, which Rene Garcia Pulido, another factory nobody's heard of today. It was Padron and Don Victor, who was our partner with the Fuente factory.
Wow.
And in one day, every factory was burned down to the ground. I mean, literally burned down by rioting and everything completely, with the exception of Joya, Nicaragua, which was completely surrounded by the National Guard during the riots.
Wow.
So and after that, we go back to Tampa, trying to recruit, train people, and we train people from all over. The U.S. government helped out in the program. They would pay 50% of the salary. We would pay 50%.
Wow.
Yeah, they helped out, and the old Villazam building, which was Eden. That's the products that made their way before they moved to the other side of Tampa. We rented it from Frank Yanessa. We used a whole big floor, and we started bringing a lot of these older cigar makers that were left around Tampa. Really tried our best to make it in Tampa. And then I remember there was a time there were a lot of Vietnamese coming to Tampa, and the government would give us a list of people if we were
I read that
for a craft and things like that. And people from different parts of the world that were migrating to the United States, and the government was trying to place them a certain place. So of course we tried everything. And I think we got up to around 80 cigar makers and everything. But even with the government assisting us, we were losing so much money. We were going to lose everything. We just could not keep the doors open.
Wow.
And that's when my father sat with me and said, "Son, I know how much you love this," but I was very young. I was in my 20s, and considerably speaking, I know how much you love this and so forth. But we have to start really consider if we're going to really invest in machinery and so forth, because we don't have a future in Tampa, in the United States, making handmade cigars. And he says, we either, we're going to machinery, we still have a hell of a business, we sell out. I mean, this is your life, your future. We still have a good business we can sell, or we have to move offshore. And that's when he said, listen, the Dominican Republic, now there's a free zone in Santiago. There's a couple of companies already there. You see the cigars, they're doing well. I'll go down, but you have to come with me. And different from Nicaragua, go back and forth, we're going to move there. And I said, Dad, I'm all in, man. This is my life, my future. And we started a factory in 1980. Now 42 years here in Santiago. Great part of my adult life.
So you went, I'm going to tell you something why I'm loving this interview, because I sat down and I had all these questions, Carlito, right? And you actually went from question number 2 to question number 14 in the order as you told your story. You answered every question that I had, and it's an amazing interview. I still got more for you. So is this the time when you knew that you were ready to take your place in the business as you went into Santiago?
I can't say I knew. What I knew is that at that moment, and still today, there's nothing more that I wanted than to make my father proud of me and support him. But also, I had a burning discomfort inside of me that when I was a little boy, being raised by my grandfather, my father worked so much I hardly saw him. He always told me that Fuente was the best cigar in the world and the most famous. And as I started maturing or becoming of age, I realized that not many people outside of our neighborhood knew who Arturo Fuente was. And
Right.
I swore that I would dedicate my life for his name to be known and respected throughout the world. And that has been my goal, and that was my goal. And now my goal is just to survive, I guess. I can't say.
I know that's right.
I go, no, man, that's not me anymore. I just want to survive and do the best thing, and sometimes really ask myself, are we, did God really give us this opportunity? Did we really achieve so much? Because humbly, it shouldn't happen to a family without huge resources.
Right.
A family, all of us, 3 generations practically born in a wooden house with tin roof and everything that I say over and over again. Because I want my children to hear this, and always see my grandchildren, great-grandchildren one day, because they cannot forget where they come from. And we should all be very proud where we come from. And,
True.
I ask myself, my God, going to Dubai, Shanghai, all over, and this and that, and I know that probably you have a lot to do with it, and of course the beautiful Melanie.
Yeah, because I talked to you one night. You were in Germany, and it was 4 a.m. over there.
Yeah,
and you were trying to go to sleep, and I was trying to keep you up.
Yeah, you're right, man.
I was trying to keep you up.
There's nothing really more rewarding than going to places and seeing people and they coming to embrace you. And man, this is the beginning of lifelong friendship. I think that's the great and healthiest nourishment for the soul that exists in a human being. And that's what I feed off of. And as tired as I could be, and as tired as I was, and as tired as I will be, and going through all these struggles to try to get my iPad to connect, and and my on my phone, you were blurring me, and now you ask me one question, and I can't keep my mouth shut. It's just like this. Yeah, man, I love this.
Hey, that's Conversations with Chevalier. That's what it's all about. And one of the things my mission with Conversations with Chevalier was just to do it, man, just to have a conversation. That's what I wanted to do. And I knew that I wanted to have you because we'd had some small conversations, and I knew if I ever got an opportunity to do this, I wanted to do it with you. And really, I wanted people to see who Carlito is and understand the journey, and what got you to the point where you are today, where you're this, mogul in a sense as it relates to the cigar industry. And one of the interesting things, and I'm going to get back to the thing, but I got to say this about you. The second time we talked, I came to realize how important people are to you. And that was very refreshing, because I think sometimes when people get to a certain level, they want to pull back, because you give so much of yourself to grow your business and to do these things. And I'm learning it as a new entrepreneur. You give so much of yourself, like you said earlier. I'm always on here, but you do these things, and then after a while you start to feel the pressure. But with you, I hadn't seen that. And I'm sure maybe it's that way at times, but man, one of the things that just amazes me about you is how you just don't stop, but you always take the time to pour into people. Those messages you send me at 4:15 in the morning, and the feedback that I get from you sometimes is very motivating for me as I'm navigating through all the time that I put into what I'm doing. And I just want to thank you officially while I got you right now. I want to say thank you for that. I really appreciate it. I think a lot of people want to know though, Carlito, you know, even for you, you took over the company. You had your vision just like your dad did. You like you said, you wanted to go ahead and you wanted to make your father proud. You wanted to make the Fuente name a household name. And I believe you did it. There's no doubt. Based on the comments and what I'm seeing here, you made it a household name. But how did that affect you as far as being, because you're a dad with daughters and sons and a wife. How did that affect you? You know, what was it like balancing, you know, during your journey as at the helm of Arturo Fuente?
Yeah, I think that if I would have been good at balancing, I might have been a ball player because I could at least have balanced a baseball bat, which I was not very good at. I, you know, honestly, I don't think I was as good as I should have been. I think that the sacrifice on my children, my family, have been very impactful. Uh, I didn't see my father growing up, so I always had that excuse. And I tell them the story when I used to play baseball because I did play for West Tampa Little League, as did Tino Martinez and a lot of great ones out of Tampa, a lot of great ball players. I did play West Tampa Little League until I was about 16 years old. You know,
Wow.
from the age of 8. So baseball, but I was, I wasn't good enough to make it. But I remember the age of around 9 years old, 9 years old, I think the first year when I started getting a little bit chubbier, a little bit more shoulder. I remember my first time. The games were first. I remember, I was at the bat, and I was a pretty big boy. And for the first time in Little League, I don't know, must have closed my eyes and I just prayed and swung that bat. Something went pop, and I heard the people screaming, and I looked up, and the ball went over left field. I mean, left center field. And I remember the people screaming, and I was just like shaking so much of emotions and going around with faces. To this day, my brother, it's hard for me to tell that story. But
Wow.
I remember crossing home, and the backstop was always full of all the parents and grandparents and all the people. I look up and I see my uncles cheering. My uncle and my grandfather. But the one I want to see was my father.
Right.
Second home run, third home run, fourth home run, he wasn't there. He will always send my uncles and my grandfather, who were always working in the factory, to give me support. So it was painful, but then everything I have, I owe it to my father. I didn't see him. And once it's been written in books and everything, because my mother once, someone told in his, and I remember that once she told my father, he used to call him Carlito. His name is Carlos like mine, but, Carlito's affectionate for Carlos, like Bobby for Robert or whatever.
Right.
And she told my father, Carlito, since you haven't come home in a couple of days, I'm taking Carlito Center. We weren't even in preschool. We weren't even in school yet. We're coming to the factory. So I remember living in my grandmother's house, which was on the upstairs at that time, while my mother went and stayed there so we could be with my father because he worked around the clock. True story.
Wow.
And I grew up being so proud of my father, and in so many ways that I thought that's just was the way of life. That's the way you make it. That's the way you take care of your. And I use that always as an excuse toward my children and probably for my time. But looking back now, huge mistake.
Yeah.
It wasn't enough just to be there in a birthday party and so forth. But I was sadly, they were home protected. I was traveling to countries that sometimes in the middle of revolutions. It's a little different because the factory was in my grandmother's house. We were always together. But my children were not allowed or it was not safe for them always. It was difficult because their school for them to be with me because the way the industry had changed. But looking back, you asked the question, how do I balance it? Horribly, my friend. And I wish I could have done a much better job. And hopefully someday I can get up to them. I hope they understand.
Yeah, I myself, we talked about it. I myself have I'm dealing with that now, and I'm trying to learn how to navigate now. I don't know what's going to happen for me in the future in the cigar industry. I know that I love being a part of it in the way that I am, and I get to have these conversations, and I, sell my accessories and I do my thing. But I'm learning that right now, so I can feel you on that. My kids are very important to me. My wife is too. And to be honest, I came to the realization that although I'm doing a lot of this on my own, I have my sister that's a big part of what I'm doing, as well as my family. But I I hear you, and it resonates with me, like, okay, Yule, not Chevalier, but Yule, you need to, have more work-life balance. But man, sometimes you're sitting there and you realize something hits you and you're like, okay, let me do this. And okay, this next thing hits me. I got to get this done. And, I take that word that you just put out there, and I'm going to apply it for me personally, and really try to find ways to balance a little bit better. But I think, sometimes, Carlito, as parents, even though you and I are almost two different generations,
Sorry. Yeah.
I feel like, I've asked my dad and I've asked my mom, and they all say the same thing. I wish I could have did things different. And I think sometimes that's just how it is. As a parent, we're our roughest critics in some respects. And I'm 55 years old, and
you don't look a day over 41.
I feel a day over 61 though.
Come on.
Because I'm tired all the time.
But really, balance is so important. In my defense, though, it was so different from my generation than my father's generation. My father's generation, he worked in his neighborhood practically. He worked in his city. When I have a family in Tampa, I moved to the Dominican Republic, or I moved to Nicaragua. I could not bring them along to later on.
Wow.
So when they moved to the Dominican Republic, nobody knew who Fuente cigars were, in many cities up north. So their daddy, Carlito, started traveling to New York and traveling to Boston and traveling here and doing events and visiting retailers and everything. I could not take them. They were in kindergarten or whatever. I could not take them with Dominican Republic. Every time I went out late night, haul with the whole family. So I was always in another country or someplace else, and I was not able to go home at night to be with the family. So, and but that was a choice I made earlier on in my life, that whatever it would take, that's what I wanted. That's what I was going to do, and I did the hard, and I have no regrets of doing everything that I've done. But to fairly answer your question, do I take credit for balancing things well? No, I do not. I wish I could have done better, but the situation made it impossible for me.
Yeah. I think it was, you were on a mission, and I think as men, sometimes we get on a mission and we get that tunnel vision. We're like stallions with the blinders on going around the track, man. You can't see the stuff. You don't see the things that some people will call ancillary. You don't see those things.
Let me tell you something. I know many of men with that tunnel vision who made big fools of themselves,
True.
Because of sparkles in someone else's eyes and a beautiful smile, that tunnel vision, it is like, is that raging bull, man. It's like sniffing away,
Right. I understand. So let's switch gears for a minute, because you got me. You almost had me crying for a minute, man. I had to pull my strings a little tighter there for a couple of seconds, Carlito. But I want to say, you've been really successful. I think you made your dad proud. And I read there was a time when I think it was the actor Andy Garcia reached out to you about filming in one of the fields or something. What was that about?
Yes, no, that's correct. Yes, as a matter of fact, last night, night before last, I flew to Miami to surprise my brother Arturo Sandoval, which I mentioned earlier, of his life story, the movie film For Love or Country, which Andy Garcia played Arturo Sandoval in the movie, which he should have won Grammys. What an incredible performance. Anybody should see the movie. It won awards for the soundtrack. And they played the movie, but with a full symphony orchestra. While the movie's playing, replaying the soundtrack live with Arturo there.
Wow.
Arturo wrote the soundtrack to that movie, For Love or Country.
Wow.
It's beautiful. Anyway, I spoke to Andy yesterday, and I met him through Arturo. He made Arturo's life story many years ago, and he was very close. He had to study Arturo. I mean, to his gesture, his move. Imagine he had to play Arturo Sandoval and imitating the sound of a trumpet when you're going 200 miles an hour with jazz riffs and everything. I mean, you got to really be good. So he had for many years, I think it was a total of 16 years, he had a film script from Cabrera Infante, a very, very famous Cuban writer, poet, and so forth, who wrote a story called The Lost City about Havana during the revolution in the late 50s, 59. And of course, Andy, living that era as a young boy, seeing his family struggles and everybody to leave Cuba in search of freedom and so forth, that story meant so much to him. But he could never really get not only the support, but the location. You cannot film that story without a palace, a presidential palace like in Havana, which was invaded by the university students and so forth, to the government, the Constitution, defending the Constitution before Castro came into power, where all the riots, everything taking place. That was historically very important. And he needed tobacco plantations to represent Cuba. And the only tobacco plantation at that time in the world that really was a storybook of what Cuba used to be was Chateau de la Fuente. Dotted with royal palm trees, pine trees in the background.
Wow.
If you hear the name Pinar del Rio, is river in the pines. And that is exactly the setting of Chateau de la Fuente. We have the royal palms, plus the tobacco barns are not like the tobacco barns that were built in other countries. And here in Dominican Republic, that were old traditional, just little huts. They were real Cuban barns, and everything. It had, it had the location that he needed. So through Arturo and Andy for a long time, we were talking, okay, about this and that. And I said, Andy, but he couldn't get the support because nobody would bond a movie, and you have to have a bond because it's very expensive to move the things and the actors and so forth. No insurance company would bond it because they was in the black after the movie Havana because of things that happened here, which were very unfortunate with the unions and strikes. It made it impossible for the equipment to move. They blocked roads. Everybody back in that time when they made the movie Havana, everybody wanted to kick back.
Right.
So it was difficult. And to the relationships that with my friends, with Ciro and so forth, I was able to take Andy to the president of the Dominican Republic, and he was able to come down and so forth. So, he went to the farm and he did some aerial shots just to get location, which were very, very important for us, really high-tech professional people. They went up to the mountains and took the view of the river and everything to give it that setting. And then, time went by. A year goes by, this and that. And I said, man, we're going to get the crop pretty soon. And I said, Andy, listen, man, not for anything. We're about to pull the crop. We're about to the crop. You're going to come. You come now. Because we got a presidential election, and we're pretty close to this president. He's really, he'll do anything to help this country. And there's no movie ever hasn't been made here. And this would be great for the country. Since that movie, it's been hundreds of movies made. Miami Vice, I mean, it's just nonstop.
Right.
This is a movie country now. But that was the one that broke the ice. So I said, Andy, so Andy came. He did some filming and this and that, and during the crop, which comes in the movie, The Lost City. And then, he leaves. But then he calls me up. But, these people are not shy to ask either. You're always like real timid because he's a superstar.
Right.
He used to call me, Carlito, listen, you sure there's no tobacco growing in the summer? I said, no, Andy. The summer is tobacco. But why not grow? I said, yeah, I'm sure it'll grow, but, the heavy rains, you break. Oh, man. Why? Because the main actors, Dustin Hoffman, Bill Murray, and all that, they're working. I can't get them down into the summer. And he said, you can't grow a small crop. And I, what the hell you tell Andy? I said, Andy, for you, I will. That's how we started with the summer crop. And we grown up tobacco to make the Lost City with the summer crop with sun grown instead of the shade grown.
Right.
That's how the relationship has started through Arturo Sandoval, And Andy's been just a dear friend, a big supporter of us, as well as us. Everybody loves Andy. You know, he's just a great, great, great friend, great father, incredible husband, just role model. And everybody can imagine.
So what did you guys do with that crop after you did all of that filming?
Well, whatever that we didn't have to throw away, which was most of it, we kept the leaves that were very nice, wrappers, so forth. And about every 3 years, we grow a couple of lost cities. So when our inventory grow, just keep enough inventory that age, and we take the lost city, which it's the lost city scholarship supported by university with all their added expenses, because even though some get scholarships by computers, they need to feed themselves. There's certain added expenses through the scholarship fund. We support the children or the students.
Okay. So was that crop a part? Because I read somewhere that you guys made the Opus X Lost City. Is that true?
No, that is the Opus X Lost City.
That's the Opus. Wow.
Yes.
So you mean so Andy making a movie gave us the Opus X Lost City?
That's correct. It's the movie. Yes, it was because of the movie, and going back while Andy was filming. Back then, the Chateau de Fuente was not what it is today. There was nothing but little partial poles of wood, with barbed wires, and it was not very secure. Like now, we got a nice picket fence. It's now it's like a Disney World, but back then it wasn't that way. And at that time, remember, there was no Cigar Family Charitable Foundation. This was a year or two before, or maybe 4 years before. It was actually 3 years before we broke ground in Cigar Family, because this was 2001. And Andy would sit under a little tree, at filming. It's in the sun. Everybody's got, handkerchiefs and everything to, protect you from the sun. And during breaks, we would sit. There's this little tree that was half peeled off, and it was just, maybe we find a branch with partial shade, and we would sit in the ground. He had all these cameras hanging from him. And imagine all the kids, they weren't in school. There weren't no schools or anything. They would be hanging around looking from a distance, and some people trying to keep them away and everything. And Andy was taking a break, and he goes, hey, no, don't. Let the kids come in. True story. And this is what you see who the man is. True story. And these children were barefooted, dirty. They had dry mud on their feet, on their hands, their nails. And I'm not saying in a negative way, but in reality, so you can picture what took place. And he said, no, let the kids come. And they never seen a camera. And he has these cameras on this thing, and it's digital. And he goes like that. He takes a picture, and he shows them, and they're all freaking out, the kids. And they're sitting on his lap, okay, looking at the camera.
Wow.
No, they were like little puppies jumping around them, uncontrollable. Little puppies when they're happy to see you get home.
Right,
and,
right.
And Andy was just like, man, just down to earth, natural, showing them the camera, hugging them, talking to them and everything. And he asked me, why aren't they in schools? And I said, well, there's no school around here. There's one little, 6 by 10 little room, but that's not really a school. There's no electricity. Some children go a couple hours from the, children are together from the age of 6 to somebody's 16 in the same classroom. That's not half a day or whatever. And
right.
he says, well, man, hopefully someday. I told Andy, I have a vision. I want to start a little school. I want to start a foundation, this and that. And he said, if you ever do that, count on me. And of course, the day that things started going, I said, Andy, we got this and that. And eventually, he says, you still got that tobacco? What are you going to do? I said, I don't know what the hell to do with that shit, man. He says, have you looked at it? I said, no, we just had it sitting there, we're sitting there, it's aging. He said, check it out. When I went back to tobacco, it was damn good, It's really no reason why. But you just don't get the yields that you do in a normal time, but you still get good leaf.
Right, right.
So he said, no, let's do something together. And, we'll come out with a Lost City cigar. And a portion you use it to help the kids for school and everything sometime in the future. And that's what we did. We started a Lost City Scholarship Fund.
Wow. So, I'm just going to segue right on into it, even though it's out of the order of my questions. But when I met you, in person, we talked about a lot of your philanthropic endeavors, and I believe you guys were doing a charitable function in either Ohio or Michigan. There was a big uh, deal some months ago that you guys did to help children.
In Detroit, well, outside of Detroit, called
Right.
Cars, a big event. We raised millions, and we've raised, I think, over $10 million, about $300,000 of a year, because they raise a million something a year normally. About 300,000 is for Cigar Family, and the rest is to help the homeless, to help all the needs in the greater Michigan area, so forth. Because it's the Shalani Foundation who really, sponsors this, and we're just the hosts. It's a cigar dinner, but it's provided by the Shalani Foundation. Tom Shalani, his wife Vicky, Dario Bergamo, just great people, and it's the who's who of Michigan. And it's not the cigars. They come there because they know it's for a good cause, and they help so many people, giving out food and Thanksgiving, and then on the holidays and whatever's necessary. And they love cigars. And it started as a cigar dinner, but it's just a big charity fundraiser. It is amazing. Big band, very patriotic, which I know will make you proud.
You know it will.
Yes, very patriotic. The beginning, first thing, everybody. I mean, you got the big band, and you have this opera singer that comes from New York, which is a cousin, the Italian, Caruso's his name, with a big voice singing "God Bless America." You have, military coming, in the front, just 8 or 10 that come out and they stand and the whole thing. And then Arturo Sandoval, whenever he's able to, which is usually out of the 10 years, maybe he's done it 6 times if he's not committed working somewhere else. He comes on his own, he gives voluntarily, and he plays with a big band, but he always plays "God Bless America" a cappella, the trumpet, and it's just an incredible event. And then you have auctions, and you have great food, and I mean, and during the daytime they have all lineup of all these cars, really fancy cars, and food. It's a food fair. I mean, very upscale, very nice, and just great people. And people, and it's become like a family event, because it started out with maybe about 500 people, and if they're still living, those 500 people still come, or most of them. And then it just kept growing from 500 to 700, 900. Now it's
Wow.
1,500 people. Sells out.
Wow.
The minute that it's announced, the date sells out, and there's just no room in the auditorium for any more. And it's just amazing.
Well, I'll tell you what, next year when you guys do that thing, maybe you'll let me come up there and do a couple interviews. I would love, because I'm a car guy for one. Although I am a big jazz fan, and I remember when you first mentioned Arturo to me, my eyes lit up because I'm a big fan of his, and I try to play his music every now and then. I play a little bit of his music, but I was going to do it the other day on my cigar track of the day. And every time I go to play one of his songs, it's usually about 5 of them that I'm going back and forth through, and I'll listen to them, and I just feel like, man, I don't know which one to play. I think I played one a couple of days ago. What was it? Chi Chi Boom. I think I played that. Chicka Boom, I think is what it is. And I love that track. I love what he does with the horn on that track. I mean, it's such a complex track, and I really like that one. I'm a big fan of his. So one of these days, I just want to stand next to him with his horn and just take a picture with him, because music moves me. It's cigars, music, and cars for me, and great whiskey.
Now, I have a question. Have you heard Trump Evolution?
No.
Okay. Trump Evolution, I think you see if you could locate it, or download it, whatever. Trumpet Evolution. Right. Arturo's won 10 Grammys, and one of his Grammys was Un Siglo de Pasión, a Century of Passion, which was dedicated to the Fuente family. It won a Latin Grammy. It won for tropical Latin music. Unbelievable. Which it has Going to Santiago, Smoke a Cigar, My Friend Carlito, and all this thing. That album won a Grammy, but Trump Evolution did not. And to me and to Arturo, is still one of his best performances. It is a compilation of all the different eras of the great trumpet players. You know, all of them. Louis Armstrong going to the Spain that played the you know, all the stuff. And it's amazing for me, you know, the jazz of New Orleans, and it's, if you get a chance, Trump Evolution, you'll love it.
I
And
got it.
you got it, perfect. And I just got back. I'm going to see if I can find it for a moment. In the gift bag that was given in his performance Saturday night, there's a new album which I'm not heard yet. I said, well, I don't know what you call it, or a disc that he gave out, and it's a brand new album. I'm dying to hear it, so he's got something new, so it's going to be exciting.
I
But
can't wait to hear it. I can't.
but I'm telling you, the man is beyond genius, because you think of him as a trumpet player, and you think of him as a jazz player. He plays. I mean, he's played with Frank Sinatra, Rod Stewart. We're just about
Right.
to imagine. And but the thing is, I think he's a better pianist than he is a trumpet player. You heard him playing?
Really?
There's
I
an
didn't know that.
there's an album called My Passion for Piano, which is his recordings and his songs, and you hear that and you go, oh my God, this guy's gonna be one of the best pianists I've heard. We say he's a monstro. He's a monster. He's bigger than human. And as far as percussions, everything, man. He plays everything in percussions. I mean,
Wow.
he could play. He writes all the. Well, he wrote the musical score for The Mule, for Clint Eastwood. He's done several movies. He did the musical score for the last James Bond movie, the part with in Cuba and all the racing. He did all. I mean, he's done all those musical scores, and that means he actually writes out every note, every bass note, every string, you know, every high note, every minute. I mean,
Wow.
every rhythm. I mean, he knows it all. He is a complete musician. He is incredible. But
Wow.
besides that, he's greater as a human being, as a friend. And boy, I'm not kidding you. He's just an amazing person, man. He is.
You're making me want to talk to him. I might hit you up. I might have to get him on conversations with Chevalier when I
But
get to be a little bigger. When I get to be a little bigger.
don't think that way. I'll tell you what. He's an easy person to speak to. He's open to everybody, and you always. I mean, he could speak about anything. He's gone through a lot, you know, struggled a lot, and especially, you know, Cuba and having getting his family out and so forth, you know, coming for freedom. He is as patriotic as anybody I've seen born in the United States of America. I don't care how many generations. He is just so grateful to the United States of America to giving his family freedom and giving him opportunity to raise, you know, his children and grandchildren and so forth. He's just an incredible human being, and he's so easily accessible. You know, he's
Well,
just he's a good guy until you rub him the wrong way, and he doesn't forgive, man. He just nonsense. He tells you the way it is, but he's open, man. He's open. He gives everybody a chance to love and to be loved, man. He's that kind of person.
all right, you sold me. I'm gonna hit you up one day, and we're gonna see if we can get him to have a conversation with the two of us one day. We're gonna do a special conversations with Chevalier, with Carlito Fuente Jr. and Arturo Sandoval. You see, I put that Arturo. I got
Yeah,
that. I got a little
no, no,
roll on that
you
thing.
got it right. You got it right. And let me just
I
say
got a little
something.
roll.
If Arturo's on, you're going to see that I'll be lost for words. I have nothing to say. I'm just going to listen and be quiet.
Yeah, I do all the questions. I do all the conversation. I just like to sit down with you guys and have a conversation and listen to your stories. Your stories. And let me tell you something, by the way. I plan on doing an hour with you because I know you get really busy. But it seems we've been on here an hour and a half, and it seems like
What?
we've been on here about 30 minutes.
No.
Man, I am loving the story. So let me switch gears again. So one of the things I learned when I first started doing the other show with you and Mel, we talked about PCA. And I don't know if you remember how I was this little kid, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed when we sat down and talked to Scott and Glenn. And I started asking questions about the PCA. And so I told you guys I wanted to go. And I got to watch a lot of the lives that you guys did. And Mel shared some things with me. And I want to talk to you about the PCA because you have some very interesting views and very interesting thoughts as it relates to the PCA and its role for the cigar industry going forward. And I remember you you telling me the story about your first time at PCA and how you didn't even get a contract the first time you went. And
That's right.
so now here you are, you support the PCA and you do all these things. And a guy asked me a question yesterday. And so a guy by the name of David, cigar pair extraordinaire, asked me, he said, and you touched on it earlier, he asked me, so the big reveal with the Padron family and Fuente, he wanted, because, I know what it's about, but I want you to kind of share, what that was about and what that meant, the significance of it at the PCA.
Well, it's something that's been on the work for years. Of course, setback with COVID and so forth, but it's been on the works. But it's something. I lost my father just a year before Jorge Padron. George lost his, and there was a high respect among the fathers, and we both, as their sons, had incredible respect for each of them. I looked up immensely to Jose Orlando Padron, and George was always speaking to my father. There was always this respect and so forth. And I lost my father first, and it was during a time that was very hard. We're going through the FDA struggles. Didn't know if I would be in business today. I knew sure as hell that if the FDA went through, that everybody that started from 2007 on had a very slim chance of anything to survive or stay in the business. That the business was going to shrink down to a handful of the few, and to me, that is right on the wall. I believe that everybody deserves a fair and equal opportunity. It's because we had that opportunity. We were very, very small, very humble, extremely small. Everybody was bigger than us, but we had an opportunity. And I really believe that I have a responsibility in any way possible, to make sure that I could do anything I can to make sure that doesn't happen to the young people that are so important to the industry, or the entrepreneurs or young generation, that they also have a chance. And it was a very, very difficult time. We were meeting in Miami a lot because that's where most of the manufacturers' headquarters were, or they would go in and out. It was an easy meeting place. And we would go to Padron's offices where he had a conference room and meet. And there was always a group of 8 cigar makers or so forth who were the ones that were together in the meetings, always there, 6 to 8 fighting, it was always that group, the musketeers, we're in this to the very end, and we have to fight regardless of who supports us or not.
Right.
It was a very difficult time. But I got close to Jorge at that time because we both had the same values. We both had lost our fathers. We both believed in keeping the legacy and the family alive. We were both so concerned about having to cover 1/3 of our boxes on the inside and out and destroy the legacy of the heritage of who our grandparents were, who our families, our hard work, and just destroy the art of our heritage, our culture. And it was something that I think impacted Jorge and me more than anyone. And I'm not taking or speaking for anybody else, but it was that so we were very passionate about it. And we became very, very close on all these issues because we thought exactly the same. We really believe that what we believed, the way we were taught what a handmade premium cigar was, this is what it has to be. And it was very difficult times. It was very difficult that godly minds who I highly respect and love, they had to go against their best interest because I had to do what I felt in my heart. It was very difficult. So it was at that time we were going to these meetings, and I'm in his office one day, and everybody was leaving. He says, "Carlito, stick around for a while." He says, "Let's have a scotch." Man, I'm not going to say no to a free drink from the Padron. I always drank as much coffee as I could there because they make good things.
Cheers to that.
Yeah, cheers.
Cheers to that.
But this is how it was so spontaneous. So he said, "Let's go back to the couch in my office," and he says, "Scotch, what do you drink?" And I said, "Man, if I'm going to drink Scotch whiskey, I want Chevalier 18. That's what my father drank." And he goes, "Wait a minute, I think my brother Orly has some Chevalier around there in the cabinet. Let me check." And he said, "But I'm going to drink Pinch." Hey, Pinch, because that was my father's drink. Okay, so we served these drinks and we made a toast and we're talking about our fathers and and the obligations that we have, the responsibility, for the next generation during this very, very difficult time where the government is threatening or the possibility of us surviving.
I think he's spinning. I don't know if you can hear me. You're spinning a little
Sorry,
bit. There you go. No, you're all right.
I'm spinning because I keep seeing Melody. Maybe she's finding out if I got on or not. So, and I was trying to stop it, and anyway, I touched it. Anyway, Jorge and I were talking about our families and everything, and I said, man, I don't know who said what first or how it went about, but it came up. What if we do something? I would never ask you, Carlos, to make a cigar for me, and I know you would never ask me to make a cigar for you. We don't do this. We weren't taught that way. We do our own thing, and we believe in what we do, and we respect what we do, and we do things differently, but we respect, even though we both learn from the same Bible or the same tobacco book. No question about it. No question about it. And it says, and I don't know how it came out, but we came up with the idea. I'm going to make a cigar, a Fuente cigar, that I'm going to blend it, thinking that I made that cigar for Jose Orlando Padron. And I'm going to see him, and I'm going to say, here, why don't you try one of my cigars? Well, please, here, enjoy a cigar. And knowing him, I wouldn't say anything. He lights it up or whatever. But maybe the next time I see him, he'll go, oh, yeah, the cigar wasn't bad. You know what? That's because okay. But that's the thing. And then Jorge was going to make a Padron cigar with his tobacco, his way, a cigar he would give my father in tribute and say, cigar I made for you out of respect and love for our families and what both of our parents represents to the next generation, the future generations. And that's how this whole concept came about.
Wow.
And years into working and so forth, and difficulty with many things. But it wasn't the difficulty, wasn't the cigar. It was the materials to get the right pack. We did everything in-house because, of course, you could outsource something, go to France, go to Italy, go to China to make beautiful things. But Jorge told me, Carlito, why are we killing ourselves with, going here and there? You don't know if they're going to deliver, if it comes out right or this and that. Our parents were very simple, hardworking people. They were more about values. So we made the box ourselves in-house and with all natural wood, everything. I mean, is when you pick it up, it's like picking up a dining table. It's so heavy, but it's made in-house. It's made with a lot of passion. I think what it represents a lot more than just having something made in Italy or something like that. Every little detail, Jorge and I work with the craftsmen and everything with all the different things, and Manny Diante support us incredibly for different things, and everybody just pitched in to make this product, but make it as authentic as possible.
Well, it was amazing. I saw it, and I had so many people. Once I announced that we were going to do this interview, there were several people yesterday in the last 2 days that have called me and said, you got to ask him about that. But I'm going to switch gears again.
Wait, you're asking the wrong person. Everybody asked me that. I said, I don't know anything. I don't know shit. You got to speak to Jorge Padron. What's his number? I don't know. He never gave it to me. He's the one. I don't know anything. I don't know anything. I don't know where they're going to be shipped. When is this? The due date for the delivery? I have no idea. Speak to Jorge Padron. Don't speak to me.
Hey, so you mentioned your dad, and I wanted to get to this because, again, in this interview, I want people to know about you, where your passion comes from, the dedication, the drive. And you and I talked one day, and you told me the story of your dad and the divine inspiration. Do you mind sharing a little bit of that story about how the divine inspiration came about? I know that can be. I know I was almost choked up when I heard it, but I think it speaks to you and who you are today. You mind sharing that?
Well, it sure as hell speaks to me pretty mighty. If I could say the John Wayne way, man, it's very mighty because I've always said my dream is to follow his footsteps if it's possible to fill his shoes. Now, a man that does what he did with the divine inspiration doesn't give me much hope of sailing across the seas and retiring someday. If I love my father so much, I want to go just like him. Like John Wayne did in True Grits. When he ran
Right.
out of bullets, he threw his gun, and then he threw the horse on top of the enemy. But that was my father. He was all about family. And regardless of his way of family, he took care of the family the way I hope that I'm taking care of mine, even though I didn't see him all the time. But everything he did was not for himself, was so unselfish, was for everyone else. Yoel, in the celebration of his life in Tampa, Florida, so many people came from the Dominican Republic, came from all over. To tell my family what my father had done for them or one of their children to save their lives or whatever, what he did for their schooling. I didn't even know these people. I didn't even know this story. My father never told anyone. He did things quietly, never expected credit or anything. He did things from his heart, and that was the kind of man. For the last 25 years, or 86 or so, I was basically, my father always said, "I'm here for you, but you do whatever you feel is right. You go with your heart, and if you fall, you learn to pick up, because I'm not going to pick you up forever." And basically, I was making all the blends. I was doing all the packaging. I was doing all the innovations, even though within tradition of packaging, doing different things. And this goes on and on and on. Aging rooms, humidity for the first time in the industry. So many different things of every aspect in the industry. And my father just gave me support, whatever I wanted. Most people said that I was going to ruin the business and probably run my father out of business. But he always gave me support. And for many years at the end, I was doing all the blending. Even in the interview of Cigar Aficionado for our 100th anniversary that was done in 2012, or the beginning of 2012, my father said, they asked about his Don Carlos and everything. My father said, "Oh, my son blended that. My son blended it. My son's the one that wanted to get the old molds. It was my son." But they said, "But Mr. Carlos, Don Carlos, but your son always says you." He said, "He says it's me." And they asked me, "Why do you always give your father credit for everything?" I said, "Because when I started in this, I was the youngest person in the entire industry. I was 17, 18 years old when I went to the first RTDA. Nobody would ever believe that a young man has so much passion for cigars. Nobody would think that a young man could blend a cigar. At that time, there was no one of my generation, and there's no one of my generation in the business who stayed in the business. There's no one." And I always said, "No, my father, my father, my father." So with time, my father said, "No, man, it's time that people know." And he was the one that went publicly and told everyone in that interview. But I was getting a lot of accolades and things in magazines and covers in China and all over the world. Always talking about my father's everything. My father's everything. And my father, in the last year and a half, is struggling for his life, but still working. And in his last days, this is where divine inspiration comes from. Because I made the cigar, but I had nothing to do with the making of the cigar. He calls his secretary to write down this blend, this formula, write down this size. I'm talking about this is the last week of his life. Write down he wanted the cigars to be made. Cigars were made a couple of hundred, whatever cigar, the master cigar maker, they sat aside. Father passes away, time goes by. This and that, go back to check the cigars. This and that. We're thinking about we smoke it with tears, thinking of Father. What a great cigar. And that we named it Divine Inspiration because he did it from a hospital bed. And before that, the brand Casa Cuba was a brand that belonged to the Maceda family. In the 1960s, an old Cuban brand. They were very close to my grandfather. but they were reduced to almost nothing. They had their business was basically in Chicago, and they did a lot of things through cousins in Chicago and Minnesota. These people are still living. The grandson of cousins, and that's how it is. This is all history and it's true. And that was one of my favorite brands always. I was always in love with the lithography and everything. It was so beautiful. I had Miss Liberty on one side and the queen of the Native American Siboney, the native, I don't even know to use the word anymore, the native Cuban Indian on the other side, and they're exchanging medicine from the States with vegetable fruits from Cuba. And, this whole label, this whole concept about this exchange of peace and love. I love that label, but we came to the Dominican Republic. We started growing, and my father always wanted to come out with Casa Cuba. And when I came to the Dominican Republic in 1980 and spent 3 months here, 4 months, and I would go back to Tampa, Florida, where I grew up, where I played in a party band for a good 13, 14 years, played every wedding, every bar mitzvah, company parties, the number one New Year's party in Tampa. For all those years, almost everybody at that era got married with my band or our band.
Wow.
And yet, I'm away 4, 6 months, 5 months. I don't see. When I remember going back to Tampa several times to visit family and things, run into some old friends and says, Carlito, where you been? We don't see you anywhere. Your band has now another person. You're not playing. No, I live in the Dominican Republic. Where is that? That's what you say. Where is that? Where is that? And of course, that generation knew where Colombia was, Jamaica, Mexico, any place that grew that green stuff, man, they were all in for it. But they never heard of the Dominican Republic, okay?
Wow.
And so going back to Casa Cuba, this is the legitimate and honest reason. We always want to come out with it, but I always thought we were going to go back to Cuba. Not now, but 25 years from now, ago, 30 years ago, and time goes on by. And my father, we got to come out with Casa Cuba. Let's come out with Casa Cuba. That brand is just sitting there. We make a few cigars, keep the trademark alive, and we sell to my cousin, just but very few, but try to just keep the trademark. And we got to come out with Casa Cuba just before we came out. So I said no, and I tell you why. Because nobody knew where the Dominican Republic was, and to me, I felt I had the obligation because I fell in love with this country. And I was very grateful to this country. And my grandfather always taught me, who was an immigrant, came to the United States, you have to be faithful and loyal to the country that educates your children, puts food on the table, and people work side by side who bring you in and treat you as family. That's how he felt as a Cuban immigrant to the United States. And I came here and I felt the same way. I'm very grateful to this country. We built the Fuente brand. We're getting known. I married a lady from the Dominican Republic. My children went from preschool all the way through high school here. My company is here. We've been here since 1980. I felt a responsibility. So I never, ever, unlike just about anybody else, ever exploited the name Cuba, even though that is my roots, that is my motherland, and that's my heritage. As I say, like Jorge Padron, we both learned from the same Bible. That Bible was written by our grandfathers and great-grandfathers and their grandfathers. The book
right.
of And in the very end, or not in the end, but in the last years of my father's life, he was very active. I was traveling around the world trying to build a Fuente brand and traveling the United States and doing a lot of charity events.
Right.
Just give me 1 second, please, because I hear sound.
Go ahead. You guys are here. This is Conversations with Chevalier, and I am blessed to be having a conversation with one of my cigar idols, Carlito Fuente Jr., telling us some great stories. Go ahead, brother.
Hey, thank you. No, it's like I said, it was so important to me to build the name of the Dominican Republic. I never really mentioned Cuba. But in the last years of my father's life, I was traveling all around, doing a lot of charity events and doing events for St. Jude's Children's Hospital, for Dan Marino for autism, anything that cigars could do to help others and give back. And I was doing a lot of events to raise money for Cigar Family Charitable Foundation to build it and to keep it going. That was an obligation I couldn't walk away from. And I was constantly traveling. And that's why I was away from home. I was traveling for these events and, of course, the cigar events and everything, but always related to charity. And on one of my returns, I see that old label on a box of cigars getting ready to be sent to Tampa. and they had put cigars there. My father did this with Rich Dolak, who is our right hand, Richard Dolak of Tampa, but he's involved in every aspect of our company with the Newmans and us. And they're getting ready to ship to Tampa, and the secretary or the person on our right hand back then, her name was Lucy Hernandez. Now she's with J.C. Newman and Fuente in the distribution because she moved to Tampa, but she was our right hand here. And I said, Lucy, what's this? He goes, no, Carlito, your dad, you know, he got a little shipment. They're saying that. No, there's no way. Stop it right now. I mean, I really got upset and this and that. I said, stop it. So my Rich calls me up. What the hell? I said, listen, you're going to ruin the brand. You cannot take the brand that way. But the reason is because I wanted to save the brand when it was authentic and I made it Cuba. I never wanted to exploit the Cuban name or throw the Dominican name in the back seat. That Cuba was so foreign, they had to use it. You don't even see on our, Cuban seed or Havana. You don't see that. To me, what's more important is Fuente. And I remember I felt so bad seeing my father, and he had done this incredible blend. So I said, okay, we'll come out with it only for brick and mortar. We go back to the PCA. That's very important to me. I could take this that I had a different hope for or vision, but we could turn in some good. Let's help the brick and mortar who are struggling, that we don't know if they're going to be in business after the FDA. Let's help them. And it's something that they could have that's not sold in the mail or it's not discounted heavily so they can make a living. But let me repackage it. And that's why I converted it from being a paper box into a wooden box. I did the best I could with what I had to work with. But I never forget the day people start calling in Tampa and sending notes and letters. Best blend, this is the best blend. The old man made it, at Fuente, Casa Cuba, this is his cigar, Casa Cuba, this and that. And I said, Dad, you're getting a lot of, a lot of people like the cigar you made, He goes, I made it, was his gravelly voice. You know what? Because you've been making everything for the last 30 years, but I want you to know one thing. I want you to never forget everything you learn, who you learn from. And I'm still the best. And I'm still better than you, with a big smirk on his face. And bro, that's the relationship my father and I had, It was like, I still could do it. And don't forget now, don't forget where you learned from. Casa Cuba comes out a big thing. And then in his last week of life, he calls his assistant and says, write this down and make this blend. And so it's different than the Casa Cuba, similar, but he tweaked it in this profile, and it was named the Divine Inspiration.
Wow.
And to his last day, man, he called the shots.
That's just a story of legacy, man. It's Carlito, like I told you this one time. When I started ChevalierLife.com, that was the reason, because I wanted to do something. I wanted my kids to look at me and say, my dad did this. Now, I may never be rich or anything. I'm okay. But I just wanted them to be able to look and tell a story like you just told us tonight, that my dad did it. He may not have been this. He may not have been that. He may have been a lot of things, but he lived life on his terms, and everything he did, he left a legacy for us. He left us something that we could share, because at the end of the day, I believe that no matter how much money you make or how famous you become or whatever you do, if you're just a guy that's digging ditches, your legacy is important. And this story speaks to that very thing. So it'll take me right to my next question. One of my last questions for you tonight. Go ahead.
If you're not keeping the show going by paying by the minute, I have one thing to say.
Man, we not. This is me and you tonight.
Something else.
It's our time, Carlito. Whatever you got.
Learn, and I think knowing you and speaking to you, I think it's very similar to what you teach your children, and anybody could learn. When you said about digging the ditch, as young as I can remember, my father says, "What do you want to be?" I said, "I want to be a ball player." He says, "Well, you practice hard. You be the best ball player you can. But you really want that." And I said, "Yeah, Dad, I think." He says, "You think? You don't know." He says, "You will know what you want to be." Whatever it is that you choose in life, do it because you love it. There's nothing more. That is what you love the most. If you want to collect garbage, be the best garbage collector in the world.
That's
And
right.
teach people how to be better collecting garbage and start your own company in garbage collecting. And be happy. If you want to cut hair, be the best barber in the world. If you want to dance, be the best ballerina in the world, but go with your heart. And he never, ever encouraged me to make cigars or get in the cigar business. All the contrary. Always tried to encourage me and discourage Cynthia. It was something that it was within and everything. And that's probably one of the lessons that I learned in life that I try to teach my children or try to convey to them because it's very difficult for them to understand. The most important thing to any father, and I'm not speaking for other fathers, I'm speaking for myself. The most important thing to any father should be your children's happiness, your children's
Right.
health, and your safety. And not what you want them to be, but for them to find their happiness in what they want to be. And don't try to force your children something they're not. I think that's when you mentioned ditches. This came out, and this could be applied to anyone listening to us right now. And I think that is something that really had a big impact on my life, and it's who I am in many ways because of that kind of upbringing. But I have to add before you ask the next question. You asked, who am I? And you talked about emotions and feelings and things that I express. And everybody mentions my father, Don Carl. But I am son of Anna Lopez. My mother was an angel. I'm full of friends, full of people all the time. Take 8, 9, 10 children to school, one on top of another, always feel, never said no for anybody, made sandwiches for everybody. Everybody came to the house. We broke windows playing ball. My sister had all, whatever it was. She always defended us and hid all the mischief that we always did from my daddy, who was very, very straight when he got home. He, he was my Snow White. And why do I say that? Because the house was full of animals and they used to eat out of her hands. And a lot of the sensitivity and at times people might see me weak because it's difficult for me. I don't know how to hold back emotions. And it might be strange for people, but that's my mother.
Mm.
I can't hide it. As much as I want to be, as much as my father, I'm very fortunate that I'm half my mother. It's who I am. I am not my father, not her. I have a little bit of
Wow.
both.
That's a blessing, man.
It
That's a
is.
blessing. And it speaks to who you are and why you feel the way you do about people. You know how many times you have you have quoted something about people. I'm gonna tell you a quote that you said once that you said to me. I heard you say it in one of the conversations we were having on the other show. You said the power of love will stand beyond when it's sincere and built from the heart. And when you said that, I remember sitting there and I read it. I actually read that when I was doing my research for the interview too, but I'd heard you say it before. And it really resonated with me because it speaks to who you are as an individual and how much you really care about people. And I said this earlier on the show tonight that a lot of people don't realize what it takes for someone at your level to still be able to engage the way you do. I have heard so many stories from so many people that have met you once or twice and said, man, he just walked up to me. He's like, it's like I've known him 20 years. That's like I've known him 30 years. And I think that contributes immensely to the growth of Fuente and to who you are as a person and who you are as a father, and to who you are as a whole, and I can only hope that as I grow and I decide to create the legacy that I'm trying to create for myself and for my family now, that's one of the things that I know that I need to keep sight of at all times. And most people that know me say he's a people person anyway, but you have a genuine love, a sincere love for people, man. I just think it's amazing. And this is the type of thing that I wanted to talk about tonight on Conversations with Chevalier. We can sit down and break down why you put certain tobaccos here and why you blend things this way. But that's not that wasn't my goal tonight. My goal was for people to meet Carlito Fuente Jr. and understand who he is, his journey, and how you got to be the person that you are today and what you're trying to do. And if anybody didn't get that tonight, then I tell you what, they'll never get it. I just want to thank you for, being on the show with me. This is my 4th episode. This is by far the best, man. And I am so honored that you pour into me the way you do. And I just want to say thank you, man. Thank you for being Carlito. Thank you for being Carlos. Just me and you. I spend more time laughing at you when I talk than anything, man. You crack me up. But that emotion, it just brings about a certain sincerity that touches me right here. And that's just me being as transparent as I can be, having this conversation with you. I'm just thankful right now. I'm blown away because I feel like, I'm seeing it in the comments. There's so many people saying, man, they're like, this is a great interview and this is what I wanted it to be. Thank you so much, man.
Well, let me just say that you bring it up for me. You led the conversation. It wasn't about cigars, about human beings, wasn't it? And to me, you cannot make a great cigar. You cannot be a great artist, regardless of which type of art or musician or anything, if you don't feel, if you haven't pained, if you are fearless, then you cannot be great. You have to always fear God above all. And my biggest fear in life, believe me or not, that's my biggest fear. And sometimes I ask myself, what is my biggest fear? I come up with that conclusion: to fail my father, fail my mother, my ancestors, all my grandparents, everyone, to fail everybody who works side by side with me, who believes in me and depends on me, to fail my family, to fail my friends, to us, an extension of my family. I couldn't live with myself if I failed. I think that's not being a very strong man. I know that others may not admit it. They may not speak the way I do, but they have to feel the same. If you're alive and you love others, there's no other way you could possibly feel. Don't have the eloquence to speak another way. I only know how to speak from my heart. And I appreciate you very much bringing out these memories, because there are memories and I don't want to forget them. And how do you not forget? Over and over again. And I hope in some way that I was able to contribute something to your audience, and by no means disappoint you in any way. I follow you every morning. I quotes, and I have the highest admiration and respect for you. I know you're going to continue to expand, grow well, and touch people. Touch love. That is the magic that you spoke about. And you will continue to grow, and you will continue to receive that love in return.
Man, thank you, man. I say it to you a lot. The thoughts of a classic man every morning are my true feelings. It's not something, although I share certain quotes, some quotes are my own, but I share things that resonate and speak to my heart and speak to the way I feel every morning when I get up to leave my house, because I never know if this is going to be the last time I'm going to see my family. People leave home every day and don't come back, man. And
that's so true. So sad.
man, I, you know, Yo, you got me for a second there, Carlito. But
Okay.
I I I love my family, and I love my friends, and I love the people that I've met. You know, since I told you I've only been doing this just over a year, and I've been very blessed to be able to be in the room with people like you and people like just even local here, Edwina Brown, who owns one of the local shops here, Blowing Smoke in Lancaster, Texas. Kia McLean, the poet. I met Cynthia Valentine and had a chance to smoke with her and have a conversation with her and talk about the Sisters of the Leaf Global Movement. I've been lucky and blessed. And however I got here, I honestly don't know, man, but I'm just so thankful that this, the cigar, our common love of the leaf brought me to this place. And man, I love it. I love you for pouring into me and for sharing your story tonight, man. And probably when I get off here, I'm gonna tear up a little bit because right now I'm almost trembling. But
Thank you, my
thank
brother.
you,
No,
thank you, man, for being on Conversations with Chevalier tonight. Like I said, I know I was supposed to only do an hour, but there are just times, man, when you just gotta talk. You know, you gotta get it all out, and we
I,
did that tonight.
I tell you, okay, I'm a man's man also. Okay, I think everybody knows this by now. And you know, I spoke about Elvis and Juan Marichal, the Hall of Famer, his impression when he saw him. You're a hell of a good looking guy. You got a beautiful smile. You got the eyes, irradiate sincerity and love and everything. But I think this is the longest time I've been on a show without looking at a beautiful blonde sitting somewhere on the backside.
I
So,
wasn't bringing no blondes in
hey,
here tonight.
kudos
This
to
is
you,
me
my
and you
brother.
tonight.
Kudos to you.
I wasn't doing it tonight. Look, Mel, I love you, but this is Conversations with Chevalier, and there was no way I was
Hey,
letting anybody come in here tonight.
Bridges, make
And,
sure you
and
let her know you love her. I've been seeing
I
messages.
love Mel. I love Mel. I love you. I love you, and I appreciate you. And I look forward to us doing Fuente Fridays. We do that every Friday night on Facebook, on Melody's page, and we have some great conversations with some great people. And I hope to continue to bring you all great conversations from Chevalier. And I'm just so thankful. This is our show, Carlito. This is all I got.
This is
What's your parting
and,
words
and
for us tonight, brother?
you, Melanie, because I heard it. You know, I heard that there are some very, very special big guests lined up for you guys coming soon. So I want to make sure that you know, hopefully I'm around somewhere so I could watch it, and I'm looking forward to those interviews. I know you're not gonna say anything yet; it's a little premature, but congratulations, you've earned it, and you know, every day more and more people will reach you because you're reaching everybody where you need to reach them is in the heart and everything. And I send you all my best wishes. God bless you and your family, and continued success, my brother.
All
I'm very
right.
grateful for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, sir. And I appreciate you. And I look forward to seeing you in Tampa. And
Thank
I'm
you.
going to
That
take you up on that offer to come down to the Dominican Republic. Me and my wife are coming. I'll let you know.
it,
And
I'm going to make that happen. You know, I think Melody has a couple of trips lined up somehow. You know, I think you know you guys do some work here. You will figure something out, but you got to come down. I want to
I
show
will.
you the foundation, the farm, and you know, aside from the factory, just I could really enrich my life just listening to you and speaking to you and sharing moments. I,
Man,
I'm saying that you may be a little selfish, but I'm looking forward to that moment.
thank
My
you,
brother,
man. Thank you.
God bless and good night to you and good night to everybody who's watching, who's on the show. And take care of yourselves and stay well.
All right. And thank you guys for joining us tonight on Conversations with Chevalier. We've had the incomparable Carlito Fuente Jr. of Arturo Fuente Cigars. You guys stay blessed, stay safe, and whatever you do, remember, smoke the cigar, sip the whiskey, sing to the music, and savor the cuisine. These are the things that I do to bring myself peace and joy every day. And I hope you guys got something from this interview. I know that I did. This is Conversations with Chevalier. Thank you guys very much, and good night.
Good
Talk to
night.
you soon, brother. All right.